Today's date is April 19th, 2021, and the interviewer is Kathy Shu, she, her, hers, and the interviewee is Dr. Lorianne Bowles, she, her, hers. And do you consent to video and audio recording that will eventually be available on a public website based off of what
Yes.
you agreed to? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So the first question is, what role has imagination and or fantasy played in your life? How has it been formative for you?
I mean, I think that it's been foundational to my life. I think it's been cultivated in that way, through my family in some ways. I think that my family was always clear with me about what types of structural limitations might exist in my life, but also very encouraging about the capacity that, I guess my own desires, my own understanding of freedom and liberation and everything also have a really important part to play as well. So for me, it's always been there. I definitely have been privileged enough to have a supportive and loving community that never asked me to be bound by or to imagine myself as being bound by like social norms and restrictions based on like identity politics. And so, it had its moments where it felt a bit naive, but it was definitely instrumental in helping me to think about just the world and like my entitlements to the world.
Yeah, and what are some of the like limitations that you tried to like imagine beyond, and like what are the ways that you would imagine?
Oh, I mean, like, of course, I mean, I think primarily because I grew up in a fairly diverse community, I didn't immediately understand the limitations of race, even though that was always a conversation in my early age. But I definitely had folks around me who was like, you need to be cognizant of uh, how you're going to be understood in the world as a Black woman or Black girl, a Black child. And for me, weirdly enough, also as a person who was always tall for my age. So the adultification of my body, even as a young age, was even earlier than I think other people have experienced it. So that was always something to think about, like, I remember being like a young kid and being catcalled and being like, I'm a minor, like, yeah, hi, that sort of thing. And so that's, and I also think about how being in a community that said the world is never going to be fair, but we try to be fair. I mean, I think when they were talking about fairness, they were really thinking about equity, but we'll always try to be fair in this space. And so that always allowed me to think a little bit differently about things because I had this, wonderful resource of community and family to encourage me to think differently about so many different things about like, gender, age, and race. I mean, and much later sexual identity, like around, how I was going to move in the world.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that like the quote that you said, like the world is never fair, but we'll try to be fair. It's kind of seems like this like imagining and creation of like a different like space. I'm wondering how like you've maybe continued to do that for yourself, like imagine like different spaces or like build different spaces for yourself and like other people around you.
I mean, well, it's funny because I mean, I talk to my kids about this. I talk to my friends about it. It's because they're like these things that are kind of like these learning mantras, if you will, where I often tell people, like, if you're not going to be exerting harm on others, you should do what you want because they're going to talk about you anyway. Like, so, like my friends always know, like, if you're going to ask me for advice, I'm like, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, yeah, but I don't care about what comes after the but. Like, do what you want because whoever they are going to talk about you anyway. So maybe you give them something really scintillating to talk about. Like I can be um, kind of transgressive in that way, but not just about imagining it and living in a dreamscape about it, but surrounding yourself with other creative and playful people who are willing to create space to kind of actualize those things, even if it's momentary, even if it's for a week, whether it's a consciousness raising group, whether it's a club, whether it's a moment, whether it's an event, a series, a workshop, whatever, like that you can produce that and actualize it, and that even in its temporality, it doesn't make it any less meaningful, right? Like it may not be forever and ever and ever, but you can carry the sentiments that come from that encounter into your everyday. And so then that allows you to kind of recreate and reimagine things as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm wondering if you can talk more about like the type of things that like maybe people usually would like feel hesitant to do that you have personally like because of your mindset been able to do.
Um, I think that mm, well, I mean, I think about relationships in different ways. I think that there are certain ways, certain kinds of like deep intimacies that I have in friendships. There are certain platonic aspects that even come from romantic relationships that are a little bit different in my life. Thinking about the tenets of what constitutes a relationship and a loving relationship have been different for me because of that. Uh, Thinking about things about like, an ethical, non-monogamous, intimate partnerships, you know, open friendships, open relationships, intimate relationships before they became like kind of like popular currency in some ways. Picking up and moving halfway across the world more than one occasion, in a place that was interesting to me, but not deeply familiar to me. Those kinds of things I think of all of them being kind of interconnected with this notion that like whatever, if something is both exciting to me and I'm also afraid of, then that means I definitely have to do it. Like I definitely have to do it because I have to try. I believe in lessons rather than like bad decisions, or like I don't do regrets. So it's so those are the kinds of things that I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that mindset, and I hope like eventually I'll be able to like, be in that mindset comfortably. But yeah, I'm wondering
But
oh,
but like to not to cut you off, but to think about what you're saying, I definitely recognize the enormous amount of, let's say, community, social, and emotional privilege that I've had in order to do that. Because there's sometimes there's this decoupling or this like deprogramming or this resocialization that we have to do for ourselves. Like, how do we get the voice of fill in the blank figure in our lives? Mom, dad, parents, grandparents, uncle, sister, brother, whatever. How do we like deprogram them and silence whatever tapes that they have running in our brains? Right. And then there's like the social encounters, educational experiences, play experiences, neighborhood experiences, all those kinds of things. And so, you know, like I hear you, but I think that we all have like we have different paths on the journey. But I definitely think that my starting place was a little bit different than other people because I was so incredibly fortunate to, in some ways, grow up in a community that was really, really encouraging to live beyond the structural violence of our lives, right? And to look at like the radical badass people like in our community, in our family, and to be like, yeah, well, if they did this thing, like I talk about my great grandmother moved to Philadelphia as a young adult, a young widow with a third grade education. And me and her great granddaughter have a PhD, and I teach at Davidson College, right? So it's just like, and some people have different places that they come from around that. And, I do think that I was fortunate enough to be in a family that, at least when I came along, worked really hard to break certain, not all successfully, certain aspects of intergenerational harm and trauma. And I benefited from that in order to have that same kind of outlook, if you will.
yeah, and I'm definitely thinking about like how like precedents that like we might like make for ourselves or like that like other people have made for us like influence the like I guess like like widening of our capacity to like imagine like other things. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, you mentioned your grandma, but also maybe like how like other people or like you yourself have like allowed you to keep expanding and expanding into like things that like you didn't think you would be able to do before, and maybe even talk about like how that might relate to like unlearning too.
Yeah, I'm always, I mean, and we could judge this as good or bad, but I'm always intentional and like super specific about surrounding myself with people who I think will push me to grow. Right. So like there's community, and it's like, oh, we're all here together. We bond and we feel like we get each other. But I'm always interested in being around like new nudgers, like push my thinking around certain ideas. But I also think that's still me being an anthropologist because I think a lot about like socialization and social and like how do we locate the center force of our desires when sometimes we can't even hear that voice because of like the social networks that we find ourselves in, the communities that we find ourselves in, that give us these kind of like running scripts about how to be. So I'm always wanting to be around people who are like, I never say more. Let me, and I'm just a super curious person. Like, you know, people say like you could have a conversation with anybody. I really can, and I'm always like interested in having conversation. Now, granted, I do have boundaries and I kind of, I prune my garden in terms of where it goes or whatever, but like in some ways I'm a little bit, uh, for some people it's even too much. I'm like, I just want to always like, okay, what about that? Okay, tell me more about this. Is there something about this that can manifest in my life in this specific kind of way? So I'm always just interested and just super curious, yet also an introvert. So it's just a thing.
Oh yeah, I mean that's perfect for like this, like knowing that like you you like having conversations and like talking to people. Well, and that's perfect for me for this like purpose. um, but yeah, I was wondering if you could also talk about like I know we talked about like within your personal community and like in your personal life, but I'm also wondering like if you could talk a little bit more about like why imagination might be important in terms of like the like greater society skill or like
Absolutely, everything. I mean, I think at the end of the day, being revolutionary or being radical is about dreaming beyond the current social climate, right? The current social condition. So I think about like all activist work is about imagination. It's not just about rejecting what is in front of you right now. It's about creating the groundwork and the seedling for what is yet to come, and even to open up people's ideas around what that's going to be about. So like I think of all community organizing, all activist work, even if a list of demands or the expectations per, are received as being within this narrow framework, they're fundamentally about imagination. And imagination is also saying like, what are the things that need to happen in order to actualize my desire for joy, to actualize my ability to take care of myself, to manifest, you know, what it is that I need in order to step into whatever it is that I imagine myself as being able to do. So yeah, I don't think about it just through like research projects or just through social events, but it definitely has to do with like with any type of kind of like activist work that's happening. So yeah, like you have to be prepared that when someone says, abolish prisons and, you know, abolish not just reform, but to for real defund the police, you have to imagine what's going to come next. It's like, I don't remember, I don't know if it's Castro or Che who say, like, okay, so the war is over. So now the real revolution begins. You have to have an enormous amount of creativity to exist outside of the coloring lines that have been set before and what that has looked like is in terms of my classroom. I think that I've tried to do that. Like students really get pissed off about that sometimes, actually. Like, like, oh, your final project can be a manifestation of what you dream together. And I think that sometimes we can be so stunted that it actually causes people anxiety rather than a pathway towards like being free and being creative. But all forms of creativity are imagination. You know, I think that all types of community work is, imagination. Thinking about an anti-capitalist world or a post-capitalist world requires imagination because in all of our lifetimes, that's been the economic norm that we've kind of grown up in. I think we see that in, a lot of times in terms of what are the new imaginaries about relationship organizations that people have, like household, like what constitutes a household. And I mean more than just like intergenerational households, but like what does it mean to have 2, 3, 4 intimate partners? Like you have to have the courage to think about and lean into what will bring your soul satisfaction and then imagine what are the practical day-to-day steps that will lead you towards that. And so all of those things are possible. And I've lived some, if not all of those things in one way, shape, or another. I've seen that in terms of like they're not as popular anymore, but there are intentional communities that really got really popular during the 1970s, where people decide to live collectively in a shared way around a certain idea. And I've had the beautiful benefit of going to more than one of those spaces here in the United States, intentional communities of, radical rad-ass feminists who are thinking about a, non-hierarchical, loving community, in a safe space for women that exists. Those places exist. So, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else I want to add.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm wondering like if there are any things that like you're currently like in the middle of like imagining that you think that are is like an attempt at like as you said, like trying to like nourish your soul better and also like trying to like move away from the norms that we're expected to follow.
I've been actually thinking about it's it's COVID driven right now, right? But like thinking about like, you know, memory and memorialization in, Black communities, during the time of COVID. What type of archives have people, I mean, that's more of an academic thing, but like what kinds of archives have different, Black and Brown families amassed during this pandemic? What is the collective kind of growth and start to begin to how to have stories document those kind of things? That's something that I'm doing on like a kind of like a scholastic sense. But then on a personal level, corny, but like being in community with people via Zoom to talk through certain ideas about something, thinking about um, you know, post-pandemic household structures and how they can potentially change and like how do we see ourselves as part of a household and be in closer proximity to one another. Those are the kinds of conversations that I'm having with my family right now, or even like what I realized during the pandemic, and that like what I even conceive of in my household has definitely changed dramatically because I think about the people that I've long to be around who have always been around, but because of COVID, they weren't. And so thinking about that differently. So I mean, that's kind of like that's super broad, um, but yeah, I think there are things that are probably forthcoming that like how I move through the world needs to shift a little bit before I can even begin to like super actualize those things.
Yeah, I'm curious as to like how like what are things that you think that like needs to change for you before you can start like actualizing these things? Like what
Oh,
happens
like for me, it's through the pandemic. Like it's
oh,
it's
oh.
it's it's super practical. Like it's not like emotional or intellectual or spiritual. Like all the there is there. It's just kind of like the confidence to move around is different. Let me close these lines really quickly. Yeah. So that's different. I don't see it as being like other types of impediments. Like it's it's not intellectual, it's not financial, those kinds of things. I kind of like, I have the hubris to be like, fuck it, I'm gonna do what I want. So yeah, I don't, I don't know. I can't think of anything to answer that question in a more capacious way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the logical like factors like definitely are very valid. I'm wondering so far, like we've talked a lot about like imagination in terms of like I think like imagining within this real world. And I'm wondering if like fantasy is something that has like played a role in your life, like something that's more like much more like magical, like doesn't follow like our real world logic or like restrictions.
Yeah, I'm like real basic in that way. I don't necessarily, I can't think of anything that I maybe like creatively in terms of writing. I think about things in a more fantastical way, but I have not cultivated that in my life in the same way. But I also wonder, a part of me is thinking about your question. I'm like, well, maybe what I'm calling imaginary is someone else's fantasy, right? Because they're, you know, different like social, spiritual, sexual encounters, those kinds of things. Like somebody else's fantasy. I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like I don't know. I can't I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now.
Yeah. And yeah, I think, yeah, this goes into like my next question of wondering like if given like basically like you could like think about this like fantastically if given no real world restrictions or like just like imaginatively like what would be the ultimate self or elements of it that you would imagine for yourself.
My ultimate self is funny enough, it will be like still like super femme, still human, because maybe I'm just limited in my thinking. But it definitely would be like have some shape shifting characteristics. But my home body would be a feminized body. Um, I don't know if it'll be earth based. You know, yeah. Think about it as like movement through time, and these like movement through time in these like shape shifting kind of ways that are not bound by the clocks, the calendar, the days of the week, etc. And just, I mean, I'll probably get bored after a while, but I just thinking about having whatever is perceived of as transgressive and maybe even decadent at the moment that I encounter it to explore it and then maybe experience something else. That's yeah. I don't know. I don't know if that's too philosophical. I can't think of it. I mean, or maybe that's super specific. I don't know. But that's what comes to mind based on what you just asked me.
No, I mean I love that like any answers are good answers. I'm wondering like would the world that you exist in be like an earthly world or would it be much more like
Absolutely not. I think it would be. I mean, as much as I love astrology, I think it would almost be like celestial. It would be intergalactic. It'd be planetary. It'd be like, and maybe I would change my mind about it in terms of what my form would take place once I've seen something different. Um, I don't know if I would map myself onto the unknown, but yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be like related to this particular place. No, it's a star. It's star based.
and would like there be like would the other people around you also be like shapeshifters or would
Oh
they
yeah, exactly. It could be like I could have an encounter with another being in a multiplicity of ways, and we manifest differently every single encounter. Yeah.
I love that. Are there like like specific forms that you think that you would take on, like depending on like different situations or things?
Yeah, I could see myself as being a landform as well. Like, so maybe not even like a mammal or whatever, but like to be a river, to be a stream, to be a glacier on whatever, or to be a star that orbits. be a ring on Saturn, right? Something like that. Like, why not? Like if we're imagining, like I don't, and there would be in the thing that I would take away is that I would take away growing pains being painful. Like, be like, oh, growing pains, you have to hurt in order to heal. And I'm like, maybe I can heal and grow without the hurt. So that would be on a cellular emotional level, that would be something that would happen in my world too. Like just growings rather than growing pains.
I like that a lot. Yeah. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about like why specifically that like you would, be in this world where you can like shapeshift like time and space wise, like that wouldn't be rigid.
Mm, Partially because time is a construct already. Like why does a week have 7 days, not 8 days, not 9 days, not 4 days? So like why remap the future world onto that framework? Like okay, yes, I know it takes this many days for the Earth, to rotate and all that kind of stuff, but like we're not even going to necessarily be on Earth, so why not think about something totally different and maybe can map a whole new conceptualization of time. Maybe time will be based on like how many growings you have, right? Rather than how many days, weeks, months, years you inhabited a river body versus a star body. So yeah.
I like this so much. I want to live in this world that you're describing.
Yes, come on over. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Because I definitely feel like just in general, like I definitely frame the way that like I view like my life as like different stages or like different like developments of where like myself. And so that makes complete sense to me. But yeah.
Yeah. Like why the number? Like child, teen, or teenager, adult. No. Maybe like you need to be like, I don't know, you have to commit to, 4 lessons as the mountain before you shift into something else. But not in like a check off the box kind of way, but in like this on the spiritual way. And of course, I mean, only you is gonna decide that it's time. There's no like, I don't imagine in this world that there's going to be like some higher being that's going to decide, Kathy, you're ready, move on. Like, it won't be like that. There'll be something symbolic, like when you're ready to move on, another being is ready to be, or something like that, maybe.
Yeah. And is it the type of thing where like you kind of just like you shapeshift between these forms, or is there like are you like gathering lessons from like each form that will like eventually accumulate into like another form or something like
It could be. Yeah, I like that too. Why not? Yeah, it could be you could be growing something else while growing self. I always like the idea of something being cumulative, because if it's cumulative, then it's kind of like hopefully you don't have to go back and learn the same lesson over and over and over again. Because like you fucked it up the first 5 times, like, or maybe it is, but I'm not gonna chart anybody else's future in my world, but like, yeah, I just think about it always being expansive rather than finite. Totally.
yeah. In that case, I'm also wondering if like all these like beings would be like, immortal beings that are like just constantly like forever like eternally like shape-shifting learning and everything, or if like time might be like even like cyclical or something, or because it's like fluid it doesn't matter, maybe like everyone has their own little like form of timeline or something.
I think so. I think of it as everyone having their formal time, because I also think there is, even as another being, you might want a different level of rest that even that form will allow you to have. You're like, I'm a wolf right now, and as a wolf, I'm nocturnal, but maybe I want to sleep for years. I'm just gonna just go and do that and be that. But everybody else's timeline doesn't have to mark in the same way that mine does, because I decided to take this like long rest. Maybe it's a decade, maybe it's a century. I don't know. But all of these things have, the one thing I have to say that I'm stuck on as I'm thinking about this is like your shape may shift, but the soul remains unchanged for me. Like, yeah, the soul is like something that really needs to kind of be consistent even across these different formations. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, especially like if you're trying to like accumulate eventually into like all like have all these things come together. Um,
Mm.
I'm also wondering like what are some of the types of like teachings that you would like you could imagine yourself like learning from like these different forms? I know that like maybe
Oh,
like there's teachings that you can't even imagine to begin with, but
yeah. I would have to say I would learn passion. I would learn humility, patience, um, different forms of care, because different forms will require different forms of care. Uh, you know, since we're talking about a harm reduction, a harm reduction based world, um, like cultivating that those harm reductive sentiments in other beings. Because if we're talking about souls, everybody's not good. So even in my world, everybody's not going to be good, because I do think that balance is important. But destruction wouldn't be a social norm.
so like everyone wouldn't be good, but through all these like learnings and different forms, everyone has the potential to like transform.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly. Exactly.
I love that. Is there like a form that like you would want to become? Like what's the first form that you want to become once you get there?
I think I'm still thinking about the star. I want to be a star. Like, I mean, like, it just emanates all this light. Because I mean, and again, I'm thinking about a star in a way that I think about them now, but like that, like even when I'm in a restful period, maybe I still burn bright for ages, the same way stars do right now, right? Like, you're like, oh, that's a dead star. Well, the entire 5 generations have seen it. You don't even know, like, it's gone. I want to be like that, you know. And I don't know. Then after the star, I definitely want to be a river, because you're such an important body, but you move within frameworks that have been set around you. I think that there's some lesson to learn in that, about being flexible, right? Like, and having these different states of being. You could be solid and you could be liquid. Like, I think that'd be so cool. I think that would be so cool.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
even know if I would become a person. I mean, after we're talking about it, I don't even know when I would be a person.
I was just going to ask like if you would be like, still like, a femme, like maybe like a femme celestial goddess, or like you have like a human form, but you're covered in stars or something. Like,
Yeah, something like that. Maybe my constellation takes on, like, some type of like super femme trope in some way.
mhm.
That people can, like, oh, there's Larian, kind of thing. Yeah, can see that, but not necessarily like the physicality of a human, a feminized human. It would just index all of these things, whatever someone else's form attaches to the idea of what it is. I'm for it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is really exciting for me just because like my personal answer to this question has like the more I think about it has always been like kind of like some type of like shape-shifting water spirit. And like I can take on like all the different forms of like different bodies of waters. Yeah.
Mm-mm, that's awesome. I just think that, I mean, there's fresh water, there's salt water, there's rivers, there's valleys, there's streams, there's lakes, and we have no, we're like, even the description that I'm coming up with is limiting, right? Like, if I'm saying water, like, Maybe maybe water is not clear anymore. Maybe water has a color. Maybe it's purple now. Maybe it's gold. Like maybe it moves like lava. I don't know. It could be any of those. Could be any of those things.
Yeah. And okay, I know you mentioned a lot about like care and like harm reduction. So my like last kind of portion of like the questions is how do you enjoy loving and being loved? And so we can start off with like the first question being how do you like to be loved by others and like what are some forms of love that you especially enjoy receiving?
I mean, I enjoy receiving love that is graceful. And I don't mean graceful in terms of how it moves. I mean offering up a lot of forgiveness and lessons and difficult but healing conversations are really important to me, like in terms of in affirmation, those kinds of things. Yeah, that's if I want to go with love languages, I'm like, oh, small gifts, but like oh, that's my daughter in the background. So like you know, yeah, that's how I try to give and receive, and I try to ask myself to move with good intention and to take a pause when I'm moving with less than good intentions.
Yeah, and again, like I do think that like the way we like to be loved by others is very interconnected with how we love others. But if you would like to go into a little bit more depth about like what are like how do you enjoy loving people and what are ways that you like to express love and care for others?
Um, Humor is weird. It's weird, but it's that, and in terms of like sharing physical space and contact with other people is super important as well. So some people say like communication, but I definitely think that like physical presence is is super important, and a safety in that physical presence. I don't know if are you thinking even more specifically than that, but I think it kind of encompasses all the things that I think about, you know, um, touch, and I don't mean just like sexual touch, but just affirmative touch as well is important. Of course, with thinking about people's boundaries and things like that as well, but and you know, uh articulating value of and for another person while in physical space or in every opportunity that you have is is super important to me.
Yeah. And I'm wondering also like the third question being like how do you like to love yourself?
Uh, how I like to and what actually manifests are not always the same time because I don't always keep those things aligned, to be honest with you. Um, I definitely love myself through travel. I also love myself through touch, right? And oh, I definitely love myself by wanting to constantly cultivate forgiveness to myself. You know, it's funny. I have this tattoo that's an ambigram, and when you look at it one direction, it says forgive, and when you look at it the other direction, it says betrayal. And when I tell people about it, they're like, "Damn, who messed you up?" And I'm like, "I did." Like I talk to my kids, and I might say like, think about like we would never talk to our friends the way we talk to ourselves. And so forgiveness for me is definitely something that has like cultivated a sense of love for myself. Like why did you do this thing that was so stupid, or you shouldn't have did this, or you shouldn't have did that, and being like, okay, maybe I should, besides not shooting myself, I shouldn't shoot myself. I'm also going to think about like, what are things that I can do to forgive myself of this moment rather than to run the tape over and over and over again and like beat up on myself for this thing that I did or didn't do. And, sometimes it's meditative, sometimes it's orgastic, sometimes um, it's quiet, and sometimes it's even like getting out the so then I can come to the other side and be cool with me. So yeah, all the things that I said, I would say put forgiveness first.
Yeah, yeah, I love that answer. Um, yeah. I'm just thinking because, like, this is, like, a lot of, like, especially, like, in the last year, like, a lot of, like, what I've been thinking about and, like, trying to learn to, like, take care of myself better because I definitely, like, it's funny whenever I see, like, in my, like, group chats with friends, maybe sometimes, like, I'll like, a friend will be, like, beating themselves up about something, and I'll comfort them in one way, and then, like, 5 minutes later, maybe I'm beating myself up in the exact same way. And it's like, "Why would I do that?" Like, I literally can look up and look at how I responded to my friend and respond that way to myself. But yeah. I'm also wondering just in terms of, like, if I were to visually represent you, loving and being loved in the ways that you mentioned and in community with people, what are ways that you see these forms of love being materialized, whether it's in, like, actions or, like, objects?
Glitter. I see glitter, I see hands, I see hearts, and you know, in action, I actually see that in something that is slow moving rather than quick paced, whatever that means to you as an artist. Yeah, that's what, but there's definitely glitter, Kathy. There's glitter.
Got
So,
it. I love
okay.
how immediate that response was.
Like, because it's sparkly. It has to sparkle. It's either glitter or sequence or shimmer. I don't even care what color it is, but it has to be something that when it moves, it catches light in different ways, right? That's what, or even if it's shiny, like some approximation of that is really would be like you know, like if it could be a sequence flag blowing in a breeze, cool. I don't, that sounds beautiful. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking that like, oh, now I know that like I bought gold paint because I was just like, I feel like it's going to come in handy here. So now we know.
I want to affirm that. Yes, I love gold paint. That'd be great.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think what you were saying about like something slow, I don't know, the like immediate image that comes to mind is like a tender face touch. I don't know, where it's like not even like fully touching yet, but just
Mhm.
yeah.
Because even the anticipation can be delicious. So because
Mhm.
it's coming and it's going to be grand. So yeah, be
Yeah,
cool.
I love that.
Good.
Mhm. Okay,
It's
so
really nice to have this conversation at the end of my day. Like, oh, I still have the capacity to think about these things, which is cool.
yeah, I've been thinking that like I felt that like all these conversations I've had with people, like it feels like a really like good bonding experience to just be able to like imagine together and just talk
Hmm.
about like all the things that you would want. Yeah,
Right, right. It is cool. It's cool. I've enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. Yeah, and I'm just wondering if there's like anything else that you would like to add about like love or like imagination or anything that you think that you haven't been able to add yet.
Oh. Yeah, I think the only limit to our imagination is our brain. Like we think that we think that we're manifesting with the mind, but I do think that we also don't spend enough time thinking about how we can also manifest with our bodies. We think I think that we kind of get stuck in that Cartesian like mind over matter, like the mind controls the body, but in thinking about these different forms and all of that kind of stuff, you could also think about like the body shapes the mind, And so, you know, as we were talking about like shape shifting and everything, I think that we're tapping into that, but we hadn't articulated. So I just want to tack that on, you know, towards it as well. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and so last question would be, do you have like a final message that you want to leave for anyone who might be watching?
Hmm. Do what you want, because they're going to talk about you anyway. Do what suits your soul. You know, as long as it's not creating harm to other people, like explicit harm to other people or intentional harm to other people, do what you want, because they, whoever they are going to talk about you anyway. Give them something scintillating to talk about. That's it. That's all I got.
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much for
You're
this.
welcome. I can't wait to see how it all comes together and the conversation that it engenders. I think it's going to be great.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to like getting all the pieces together.
Nice. Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. Well, keep me posted.